Taiwan's recent election ended in ruling party candidate Lai Ching-te securing the presidency, marking the first time a single party has led Taiwan for 3 consecutive terms.
In many ways, Taiwan is an exemplary democracy these days.
Deemed a choice between war and peace by China, Lai's Democratic Progressive Party's commitment to self-determination, social justice, and resistance to external pressures struck a chord, securing nearly 40% of the votes despite domestic challenges. But what does this mean for the nature of Taiwan's ties with China?
Beijing still has a kind of hearts and minds strategy, try to convince them of the benefits of greater engagement and of favoring positions that Beijing likes.
And how does this election influence their relations with the world?
Taiwan in the U.S. imagination has always been more than just Taiwan. It's also existed as a kind of alternative to CCP rule on the Chinese mainland.
This is Global Insights by Network 2020. Today, we're joined by Dr. Kharis Templeman, Research Fellow at the Hoover Institution and Manager of the Project on Taiwan in the Indo-Pacific region at Stanford University. Moderating the discussion is Courtney Doggett, President of Network 2020.
Where I'd like to start, Kharis, is with an overview. I think most of us have a general sense of what happened in the elections, but I think it would very much help us to hear from you your sense of what some of the key outcomes and implications are of the elections that were on the 13th and what they tell us about Taiwan at the current moment.
Yeah, so thanks again, Courtney, for having me on tonight. It's a pleasure to talk with you and your membership here. Taiwan had its general elections for both the president and the legislature on January 13th. Both bodies are on a 4-year election cycle. The election that was held last Saturday, it comes around once every 4 years. Just to give you a kind of brief synopsis of what happened and who the parties were, we had a 3-candidate race for the presidency featuring Lai Ching-te, the current vice president of the Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, facing off against 2 challengers, the KMT, or Kuomintang's candidate, Hou Yu-yi, who's the mayor of New Taipei City, and then the 3rd candidate, Ko Wen-je, the former mayor of Taipei, and the founder of a new political party called the Taiwan People's Party, or TPP. And for the first time since 2000, all 3 candidates won over 20% of the vote. So this was a true 3-way race. Right up until the end, it wasn't clear whether voters would abandon Ko Wen-je, the kind of upstart challenger, to vote strategically for one of the 2 major party candidates. And in the end, they mostly didn't. They mostly stuck with Ko Wen-je. And so we got a closely contested race with Lai Ching-te of the DPP winning with just 40% of the vote, Hou Yu-yi coming in second with 33.5%, and Ko Wen-je coming in third, but with a pretty remarkable 26.5%. Lai won the election for the DPP, but the DPP also can't really claim a mandate in this election because 60% of the electorate voted for someone else. And so this was not really a ringing endorsement of 8 years of DPP rule. And then in the legislative race, the DPP had a 7-seat majority when it went into this election, and it came out without a majority. So the voters, about a dozen seats actually flipped from the DPP to the KMT. And so we have a closely split legislature now, with the KMT at 52 seats, the DPP at 51 seats, 2 independents, and the TPP holding the balance of power in the middle between the 2 major parties. So no party controls a majority, and we're in for 4 years of coalition building, I think, in the legislature. And in terms of implications, well, let's start with Beijing and their response to this. Beijing clearly does not like the DPP, did not want to see them reelected, and so in that sense, this presidential outcome was not what they wanted. But they responded by noting that 60% of the electorate had voted for someone besides the DPP, and that mainstream opinion is no longer with the DPP. And so they've kind of framed this as at least trends are moving in the right direction in Taiwan. In terms of the U.S. response, I think Lai's election was long expected in the United States, and shortly after the election results were known, the Biden administration dispatched a delegation, bipartisan delegation of former retired officials to Taiwan to meet with the now president-elect and his team. And the statement issued by the State Department about this election was pretty generic and in line with past elections. And so the U.S. side is trying to signal that it's business as usual in this relationship, and that there will be no change in U.S. policy as a result of the election.
Thank you. So just sticking on the domestic side for a moment, what do you make of the fact that the legislature did flip? And what are the implications? I know you mentioned that it would be 4 years of coalition building, but what does that look like, especially in such a highly charged area of the world?
Yeah, well, it means it's going to be difficult to depart from the status quo. So certainly in cross-strait relations, I don't think Lai is going to be able to push legislation or other reforms that would shake things up. And so from Beijing's perspective, that's probably a good thing. From the U.S. perspective, that's probably a good thing as well. The possibility for coalition building is a little bit uncertain, in part because the Taiwan People's Party, this upstart party, has deliberately positioned itself in the middle of the political spectrum on almost every issue. And they've been quite vague about what they stand for. They're basically, to this point, they've been a vehicle for Ko Wen-je himself to run for the presidency. And the legislative slate was far overshadowed by Ko and his personality. So as a party without any kind of core values or signature policy issues, they actually make an ideal coalition partner for both the other major parties. They look pretty easy to buy off, actually. And so both the DPP and KMT have also already reached out to the TPP to try to get them on side and to get their support in the election of the legislative speaker, and then potentially on policy issues that they care about as well.
Great, thank you. You mentioned China's reaction, and China in Beijing is trying to frame this story as one where 60% of the electorate didn't actually vote for the incumbent party. What do you make of China's reaction more broadly, and how do you think Beijing will respond to 4 more years and a split presidency and legislature, depending on what happens with coalition building?
Yeah, excellent question. So first I'd note after election night, so Lai Ching-te gave his victory speech at about 9 p.m. And in that speech, he was quite vague about cross-strait relations. So in particular, he didn't repeat some of the phrases that Tsai Ing-wen has used to talk about cross-strait relations. And in doing that, I think he left himself some room to potentially carve out a new approach, or at least a new set of rhetorical positions. And he avoided, I think, saying anything that would give Beijing an excuse to react harshly to his election. And then on the Beijing side, their statements were, I would say, not they have a long history of saying very unflattering things about the DPP and indicating that the DPP and anybody associated with them is just an irredeemable independent splittist. And by those standards, they were fairly moderate in their statement on the election as well. And so, so far at least, we haven't seen either rhetorical or actual fireworks in the relationship. So we'll see that Taiwan has this quirk where the legislature is actually inaugurated on February 1st for another term, but the president doesn't come in until May 20th. So there's actually a long transition period that we have to go through before Lai Ching-te takes office. And the fact that the legislature will not be under DPP control anymore means that Beijing, I think, can afford to be patient and wait for Lai to signal what he's going to do in cross-strait relations without worrying too much about the kind of lame duck period where Tsai Ing-wen no longer has a majority in the legislature. The legislature will block any kind of last-ditch attempts to change things before the transition of administration takes place. So we'll see, but I think given the possible outcomes that could have happened right after this election, we're in a period where so far both sides have shown some moderation. That said, Beijing has also already flipped a diplomatic ally of Taiwan. Taiwan had 13 before this election. Nauru just announced yesterday they were going to recognize the PRC and de-recognize the ROC on Taiwan. And so that something like that was expected. I don't think we could identify which of those remaining allies would make the flip, but it was pretty clear Beijing had been working on this and had it in reserve in case the election outcome didn't go the way they wanted it to, and are using this to send a shot across the bow of Lai Ching-te's administration, his incoming administration.
Before we move on to some other reactions from other countries, I wanted to just stay a little bit on the domestic piece one more time in the transition period. What would you be looking for as the cabinet is being built in terms of signaling which way the administration might go in terms of its overall policy, particularly toward China?
Yeah, I don't want to get too into the weeds of intra-party politics, but let me just note that there's a couple different, I don't want to call them factions, but a couple different groupings within the DPP. There's the part of the DPP that Lai Ching-te came up with tends to be a little more grassroots and a little greener, so more China skeptical or pro-independence friendly. And so in terms of who he appoints to his new government, it'll be interesting to see how many holdovers there are from the Tsai administration. And Tsai was much more towards the moderate wing of the DPP. So if you see a lot of holdovers or other people who are not part of Lai's faction within the DPP, I think that will give you some indication of what his administration is going to do and look like. The other question here I have is the bargaining among the TPP and KMT and DPP has already begun, and the TPP is actually in a position to push for a ministry or two in the incoming administration. I don't know if they'll get it. I don't know if Lai is willing to consider that, but it's part of the bargaining space right now, and so it's possible that you could have a TPP member or even Ko Wen-je himself offered a position in the Lai cabinet, and that raises some interesting questions then about whether they could strike a broader kind of coalition agreement that would give Lai a working majority in the legislature going forward. So I'm watching that pretty closely over the next couple of months as well.
Have there been any global reactions that surprised you?
Well, the Philippines, the president of the Philippines had a tweet congratulating Lai Ching-te for his victory, and There was a pretty harsh reaction from Beijing in response to that. They, I think, called in the Philippine ambassador and sent him a demarche. That exchange is interesting, at least maybe not surprising given the way that Philippine-China relations have gone over the last year, but it's a good sign. And Philippines is a really important potential. Well, it's an important U.S. ally and an important unofficial partner of Taiwan as well. And so, if they're willing to say this publicly in a way that Beijing really doesn't like, that's a good sign for Taiwan and secondarily for the U.S. Ability to work with partners and allies to help Taiwan. So that was one thing that I noticed over the last 48 hours.
Great, thank you. Shifting gears a little bit, I'd love to just dig into the U.S. Role within just observing the elections and beyond. So considering Taiwan's significance in U.S. strategic interests in Asia Pacific, how has the role of Taiwan evolved over time in the eyes of Washington? And I know you mentioned that the reaction from the State Department seemed pretty even keel. What do you expect going forward?
Well, so Taiwan's strategic interest to the U.S. Really goes back to June 1950 during the beginning of the Korean War. The U.S. actually intervened at that point to prevent the PLA from coming across the strait, and the U.S. in effect has been there ever since, keeping Taiwan as a de facto independent state. So the first U.S. interest in Taiwan is ensuring that there remains a regime that is friendly to U.S. interests on the island. Taiwan also had this amazing growth period in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and I think the U.S. can rightly claim some credit for that growth. Taiwan's takeoff was driven in part by having tariff-free access to the U.S. market, or at least privileged access to the U.S. market. And so Taiwan is a kind of success story that the U.S. can point to in terms of its posture during the Cold War and relationship with allies and partners in the region. And then Taiwan's transition to democracy and consolidation of democracy has become a pretty important U.S. interest as well. Number one, because democracies around the world are struggling a little bit. Number two, because Taiwan in the U.S. imagination has always been, it's always been more than just Taiwan. It's also existed as a kind of alternative to CCP rule on the Chinese mainland. And so if you see Taiwan grow quickly, develop, share prosperity widely among its people, and consolidate a liberal democratic regime, that suggests you don't need the CCP in charge to have a prosperous, free place. And so the CCP's insistence that Taiwan is a part of China and should always be a part of China has an ironic kind of implication that, well, if Taiwan really is Chinese, the CCP could, it might do China better actually for the CCP to relinquish one-party control. And so I personally think Taiwan's success as a democracy as well as an important U.S. interest. And then, so the fact that they've just concluded another successful election, it was hotly contested, and yet the votes were counted in less than 5 hours. We know exactly who won. There's no disputed, even in the legislative races, even in the really close ones, there's no recounts. Nobody is contesting the result, and everybody has kind of accepted that the voters delivered their verdict, and they've already transitioned into figuring out what comes next. So in many ways, Taiwan is an exemplary democracy these days.
Thank you for that. The takeaway that I hear from you talking is that based on the reactions from China and Washington and the somewhat split, not quite split result, is that it almost seems to be a stabilizing result in that there aren't going to be any major shifts in policy. Is that a correct takeaway, or would you finesse that?
Yeah, let me elaborate on that a little bit. I think that's basically right. Certainly from the US side, this is a continuation of a DPP administration that they've grown very comfortable with. And so Lai is a new entity, a new president, but the broader kind of comfort level with the Tsai administration and their approach to security and U.S.-Taiwan relations has been pretty good. And the general sense I get from people in Washington is that they expect that to continue. On Beijing's side, let me elaborate a little bit on what their strategy has been over the last 8 years with the DPP administration, and then I suspect that this strategy will continue with just some ratcheting up or down along in the margins. So the approach ever since Tsai Ing-wen was elected has been what I'll call a dual track strategy. So they've had a hard side and a soft side to their Taiwan approach. On the hard side, they've tried to squeeze the DPP administration and undermine their popularity in Taiwan. And so they've got three types of tools in their toolkit to do this: diplomatic, economic, and military. And on the diplomatic front, they've flipped a bunch of diplomatic allies. They've basically prevented Taiwan from having any sort of de facto participation in international organizations, such as the World Health Assembly or ICAO. On the economic front, they've played politics with some symbolic economic exports to the mainland. Many of you are probably aware of Beijing's sudden bans or suspension of imports, at least on Taiwan agricultural products. There was one a couple years ago, pineapples, where Taiwan was shipping a large share of its pineapple crop to the mainland. Suddenly it was announced that the mainland found pests in some of the pineapples and they were going to ban them as a result. And so there was this kind of rally around the flag effect in Taiwan. People started eating lots of pineapple to support the administration. And then Japan stepped up and imported the rest of the pineapples. And so it didn't actually hurt Taiwan, but it was intended to send a kind of symbolic rebuke to the Tsai administration and to try to, over the long run, undercut her support among politically important constituencies in the pineapple growing parts of Taiwan. They've tried to do that with other goods as well, mostly agricultural products, mostly products that don't have a big impact on the kind of overall dollar amount in trade, but that have high symbolic resonance. So everybody in Taiwan can understand what a pineapple is. They have a good sense of what it means to have a ban on pineapples going to the mainland. Whereas if you have some obscure petrochemical product that you impose it on, it doesn't have the same political impact. So Beijing has deliberately used that kind of economic lever to try to hurt the Tsai administration's popularity. And then on the military front, I imagine this is the part that everybody here knows about, that the PLA has engaged in much more extensive exercises in the air and sea space around Taiwan. So most prominently during and after the Nancy Pelosi visit in 2022, they launched large-scale military exercises near Taiwan, and they've continued to run flights, and they've sailed ships through international waters, but waters that are quite close to Taiwan, and that they had water and airspace that they had previously avoided intruding into. And so they've in effect created a kind of new normal where PLA aircraft are consistently crossing the median line of the Taiwan Strait, and in some cases encircling the island, so flying from north to south around the East Coast and back in. And that has been widely publicized in Taiwan. The Taiwan Ministry of National Defense now routinely tweets out maps with lines showing where the flights ostensibly took place. And I think actually that kind of plays into Beijing's strategy. They want the Taiwanese to be aware of all of the military operations around Taiwan and to feel more and more kind of threatened by that. So that's the playbook on the hard side. On the soft side, though, Beijing still has a kind of hearts and minds strategy where they're trying to engage with anybody who is not obviously pro-DPP or pro-independence and try to convince them of the benefits of greater engagement and of favoring positions that Beijing likes. And so members of the KMT have frequently gone to the mainland and engaged with their counterparts there. Lots of business people in Taiwan, when they go to the mainland, they still are in some cases, given very favorable treatment, especially by local governments who love Taiwanese investment and want to see more of it. There's also been a push to restart, after COVID, the people-to-people exchanges across the strait really were shut down for a couple of years. And after COVID, the Chinese mainland side is really interested in seeing those restart. And so what I'll call the soft track of this two-track policy remains in effect, and I expect to see them continue to push that even with a third DPP term looming on the horizon. So overall, what I'd expect is continued use of this diplomatic, military, and economic coercion to try to hurt Lai and his administration, but at the same time, efforts to demonstrate that if you're not the DPP, if you're not pro-independence, look at all these good things that will come to you, and to continue to try to shift public opinion in a pro-China, pro-PRC, or pro-unification direction.
Great, thank you. And one final question. So if you're China and you're looking to perhaps draw in some of those non-DPP supporters, are there some clear demographic or other indicators of who supports which party? When you're looking at it, is it generational? Is it urban, rural? Are there natural divides within the constituencies?
Yeah, great question. It's complicated, but I'll massively simplify here and say age is by far the most important demographic variable, especially in this election. Old people voted, I should be careful. Older people here voted, those over 60 supported the DPP or the KMT candidates at very high rates and really did not support Ke Wenje. So Ke was polling at 5% or below in the over 60 demographic. He was polling in some polls as high as 50% in the under 40 demographic. So the age gradient here is just enormous. And that worries both parties for different reasons. The KMT has long struggled with younger voters. It's pretty strong in the, I would call them late middle-aged folks now in the 40 to 60 category. It has a core base among older voters who were disproportionately mainlanders. The challenge for it, though, is that very few people under 40 would even consider voting for the KMT. And we actually saw that in this election. They did quite poorly in that demographic. For the DPP, the concern is they were used to being the party of young voters until now. And young voters, by and large, abandoned them in this election. And they're kind of scratching their heads trying to figure out why that was and what they can do potentially to get young voters back. And so the real beneficiary of that swing has been Ke Wenje and the Taiwan People's Party. And we had a big conversation, a bunch of us who were there to observe the election the night after the election. And the top question was, what are young voters thinking? What is appealing to them about Ke Wenje and the TPP? Or another way to ask this question is to flip it and say, why didn't they vote for the DPP in this election? Why are they so disillusioned with the DPP when in 2016 and 2020 they voted overwhelmingly for Tsai Ing-wen?
Thank you for listening to this episode of Global Insights. For more insight and analysis on global events, and to learn more about how you can join our community, visit us at network2020.org and follow us on social media.